Welcome to Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters, where we talk about historical films and series as windows to the past and mirrors of the present. I'm Michon Boston.
And I'm Tequina Boston. Summer's around the corner. That means it's time for our Page to Screen podcast, where we recommend 5 books for summer reading that inspired the historical dramas we've been watching and talking about on the podcast this season. This year's Page to Screen summer reads are extra special. We've hosted 3 of the book authors on the podcast. 2 books were adapted into series, 1 into a feature film, and 1 author was a historical consultant for a biopic.
But wait, there's more. 2 of our summer reads are by non-living authors, but their work was well represented on this podcast. One by an actor in the adaptation, and another by the executive producer of the second. Can you guess what books we're recommending and from which podcast in Season 4? You're about to find out.
And so the irony of adapting the novel into a TV series, of course, is that now we are in the belly of the beast. We are in the machinery of pop culture, making a satire of pop culture. And there's really no way of getting around it, I think. There's a way of getting around it. Don't adapt your novel. But I wanted to. I wanted to do that, and we can get into why. But, part of the problem is when confronting power is that sometimes you do have to operate within the machinery of power in order to try to subvert it. And that's the attempt in the making of this into a TV series.
That was Viet Nguyen, author of The Sympathizer, which was adapted into a series for HBO in 2024. The Sympathizer was a big kickoff for the podcast's 4th season. We met and recorded our conversation with the Pulitzer Prize-winning author at the Library of Congress's National Book Festival in Washington, D.C. last summer.
Published in 2015, The Sympathizer is described as an espionage thriller and cross-cultural satire about the struggles of its narrator, a half-French, half-Vietnamese communist spy or double agent, known only as the Captain, who arranges to come to America after the fall of Saigon. While building a new life with other Vietnamese refugees in Los Angeles, he is secretly reporting back to his communist superiors in Vietnam.
Okay, my takeaways from this book and even this series, and I would even say talking with Viet, it really changed my vocabulary in terms of how I refer to the war. I now call it the American War in Vietnam and not the Vietnam War. That was a takeaway and a change for me.
Yeah, and it was also because of Viet that I was aware that April 30th, 2025 was the 50th anniversary of the fall of Saigon. And that's a significant piece of history not only for Vietnam, but also the United States, because it meant that that's how a number of Vietnamese families came to the United States after that war.
What were some of your favorite scenes? I don't know where to start, from the book or the series, because one of my favorite stories or moments in the book is when they're making that kind of Apocalypse Now film, and the captain is involved as an advisor. And you get more of it in the book, but it really comes to life in the series because, after all, the series is film. No, it's media.
I would say, too, that the director's decision to have Bon play the character in the film,
And Bon was
the captain's, one of his very close childhood friends who also came over to the United States after the war ended, and who had lost his family in the process of trying to get to the United States, his son and his wife. And Bon, who's played by Fred Nguyen in the film, the idea was to have him play all the characters in that movie that you're referencing, it's like a film within a film. All the characters who died. And it was a
Right.
way, it was satirical, but at the same time, it was the way that Bond was processing his grief over losing his own family, losing his country, and losing the life that he knew and having to make a new life in this strange country that didn't really embrace the Vietnamese refugees, even though at the same time the U.S. was responsible for their being in the United States. And I think it also was very clever casting Robert Downey Jr. as he was a character, but he was also the symbolic representation of the militarism, the government, the
the movie director, Hollywood.
Right, Hollywood, the capitalist structure, and even religion, and the role that all of those systems played in the war and in the situation of the Vietnamese who came to the United States, as well as the Vietnamese in Vietnam.
Right. They were 5 characters that directly engaged with the captain and shaped his whole story in terms of those 2 worlds. And that was the CIA agent, the movie director, a politician, the Catholic priest, who is the French Catholic priest who is his biological father, and what I call the Orientalist professor, Professor Hammer. So the academia plays a part in this
Right.
as well, that world.
Yeah, yeah.
So
And how they were all tied together, which is very interesting now that in our we're looking at a time where academic institutions and government institutions, as well as military and media and corporations, are all, in a sense, playing a role in what's going on in terms of the politics of the country in very strong and interesting ways.
yeah. So The Sympathizer is definitely a story for our times.
Yeah. It's not the past. It's definitely a mirror of the present. It's not just history of the past.
The series kind of helped me through the book. It was kind of like an outline, whereas you get more in the book. There were changes, but as Viet says in our podcast, he was involved in the production of that film. I mean, he was happy with what Park Chan-wook suggested and the changes. So this is one of those cases where it's a win-win either way.
Yeah, I think so. And so many, it's been interesting hearing people who say that they have been inspired to view certain films and series after listening to the podcast. So I think whatever portal you enter in, you can still enjoy the book, or whether it's the book, whether it's the podcast, whether it's the film. However you come in, if you find yourself intrigued by the story, I think you'll find that each of those reinforces the other. And for The Sympathizer, I felt like the novel was the backstory to the film. It's the way of, okay, you get all of the details because, of course, film has to, because of the time constraints, even with a series, you still have to make choices about what and how you're going to present the storyline. Whereas in the book, you pick it up, you put it down, you can relax with it, you can come back to it. You might read it if you're commuting on public transportation, you might take it with you to sit in while you're waiting for an appointment. So I think that however you approach The Sympathizer, you will enjoy it.
Yeah. And there's some things you can do on film that you can't do in a book. There's some things you can do in a book that doesn't translate to film.
Right.
Our next or second page to screen book for summer 2025 is?
Well, actually, it's not a novel or a nonfiction book. This read is a play. It's The Piano Lesson that was written by August Wilson in 1986. The play's title is inspired by a painting by the artist Romar Bearden, who, like August Wilson was a Pittsburgh native.
Ooh, Pittsburgh.
Yeah. And the drama follows the Charles family in the Doker Charles household. You have a brother and a sister with different ideas about what to do with a family heirloom, which is the piano. Should they sell it to purchase land that their enslaved ancestors toiled on, and in that way build their own wealth? Should they keep the piano, which includes carved depictions of two distant relatives and therefore is a representation of their own ancestry and heritage? In episode 62, we talked with Constanza Romero, the executive producer for the 2024 adaptation of August Wilson's Pulitzer Prize-winning play, The Piano Lesson, streaming on Netflix. Constanza Romero is also the widow of the Tony Award-winning playwright August Wilson and executive director of the August Wilson Legacy, LLC.
I also love when we get to see Boy Willie's father and him as a little boy, and they're touching the earth of the earth. And his father says, "What is the difference between land and dirt?" And they say, "Land is there forever." And that is not something in the play, but seeing that little boy learn this lesson, we get to really understand Boy Willie's passion and his absolute, him being absolutely convinced that he needs to sell this piano to buy some land. And we get all these close-ups, of the characters. We get to see their pain or their joy or their struggle. So I think that Malcolm did a beautiful and, most satisfying adaptation of the play.
The Piano Lesson is the most recent adaptation of an August Wilson play. There was an earlier adaptation of The Piano Lesson for television in 1995. The other two plays that were adapted for film are the 2020 film Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, a story set in 1927. We talked about this film in episode 7 of the podcast, dedicated to the late Chadwick Boseman, who's featured in Ma Rainey. Another adaptation for film is Fences, with Denzel Washington and Viola Davis, who plays Ma Rainey in the Ma Rainey film. Denzel Washington's son, Malcolm Washington, directed the Piano Lesson film, and his brother, John David Washington, has the lead role as Boy Willie. August Wilson wrote 10 plays in what's known as his American Century cycle. The plays center African American dreams and struggles during each decade of the 20th century. The Piano Lesson was written in 1986. August Wilson died in 2005, 2 years after writing Gem of the Ocean, which takes place in 1904 at the beginning of the 20th century. There's no play in the American Century cycle set in the 1990s. One of the things I love about August Wilson is this whole concept of the American Century cycle. Each play takes place in a different decade of the 20th century. What are your thoughts about that?
I would say that what strikes me about the Piano Lesson in particular is this whole question about what does legacy mean and what is our relationship to history? And when you see that question about do we sell the land or what is the use of this piano really? That I think is a kind of a contemporary question too about what is the purpose of history and what do we do with the legacies that history has, that we've inherited, I guess is the way to say it. So it was interesting seeing Boy Willie and Bernice wrangle around this piano, but was also interesting to see how that piano, in a sense, even though it contained the pain, because it had the faces of family members who were sold away.
And it wasn't, and they weren't put there solely for the family, that family.
Right. They were put there so that the plantation owner's wife could, I guess, as they say, have her cake and eat it too. So that she had the piano with the faces of the people who'd been sold away. So in a sense, she was still owning members of the family. And at the same time, for the ancestor who carved those images, it was also a way of retaining connection with family members that had been sold away.
Because he was the only one who wasn't sold away. And I read the play, and I tend to, with August Wilson, read the play before I even see the play or see the film. Ma Rainey was another example of I read the play, then saw the play, then saw the film. And I find that his plays are very readable, and I really enjoy them. I'm reading Gem of the Ocean now, after seeing Felicia Rashad a couple weeks ago quote from the play, and I'm like, wow, that was powerful. I'm gonna have to read the rest of this, and who's Aunt Esther. Same thing with the piano lesson. I read it. It was a really good read. And again, there's some things you can do in film that you can't even do on stage. For example, I thought it's very effective to see the backstory. You talk about the making of the piano and the ancestor, the Charles ancestor, who had this great talent for carving. He wasn't sold because they saw that value. The owners, the white owners, saw that value. And there was no price that I guess they could put on that. So you see that backstory, and it's only until that family understands what that piano story is, could they see its purpose in their lives, and that they were taking ownership of it now. And I can't help but think about the piano lesson. I mean, right now, there's all the news about the burning of this huge plantation in Louisiana. I think it's the largest.
It was the largest antebellum mansion in the South.
There's a poster for the film The Piano Lesson where you see the piano burning in the distance, and Boy Willie is sort of in front looking in the distance and seeing the burning piano. When you take ownership of something that was fatal to your family's existence or harmful, traumatic, all those words, slavery, let's just say it, slavery. The piano had a different meaning for the sister, but she wasn't really seeing it in terms of how is it a living legacy to this family versus Boy Willie, who saw the money value around it, but to support a dream. And I know I brought the story of the plantation in, but the problem with that plantation was that they didn't tell the real story of that plantation to sell it, and they were selling it as something. They were selling the lie and not the truth.
Yeah, they were romanticizing a history that has pain in it and not wanting to talk about what that pain is. And I think in a way, the ghost in the piano lesson is a way of representing the pain that family, the Doker family, was carrying from their ancestors' experience of enslavement. And somehow they had to free themselves of the legacy without denying. I mean, the piano was a way of saying, yes, it happened. And the ghost, this is my interpretation, felt like the part that you just don't want to confront. But until you confront it, you can't really exercise it. You can't release its power over you until you've really just looked it in the face and recognized it for what it was and what its impact was in your life and your family's life. And so it was, you actually, in some ways, you saw a battle of the ancestors, a battle with the ghost of the enslavers, and through the piano itself, the battle of Boy Willie and Bernice's ancestors. And it was the ancestors, their ancestors, who were able to use their power to free them from the pain of that legacy. And yet, there's still kind of like a wide openness to the play. We don't know really, like, what happens next. Will the piano go to the church and be used as an instrument? Will Aretha take up piano? Is Boy Willie, is he going to find another way to get land and build the family? Well, the questions are still there.
But also, the piano had the ghost of their former, or the ancestor, the descendant really, of their former owner. It had all those pieces in it. It's one of August Wilson's, I would say, more layered plays. The spirits are present. And, it's like Hamlet's father, that it's a Shakespearean thing too. The spirits tell you what's going on, what happened, and why we're here, which only spirits can do.
Well, speaking of the topic of ancestors, our third summer read for 2025 is about a significant ancestor who's very relevant to our own time.
That would be Shirley Chisholm. And that is our third summer read for 2025. It's a nonfiction book titled Shirley Chisholm in Her Own Words, Speeches and Writings, edited by Zinga A. Fraser, published in 2024. Dr. Zinga A. Fraser is an assistant professor at City University of New York's Brooklyn College and director of the Shirley Chisholm Project for Brooklyn Women's Activism. She was the historical advisor, that's Dr. Fraser, to the Shirley biopic. Shirley is directed by John Ridley and features Oscar-winning actress Regina King as New York Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm in a story about Chisholm's 1972 run for the Democratic nomination for President of the United States.
In episode 59, Dr. Fraser joined us for a conversation about Shirley Chisholm and her book of Chisholm's speeches and writings, as well as to talk about the film, Shirley.
The thing that Chisholm does more than anything else is really show what it means to be unbought and unbossed, not as in the slogan, but as a political ideology. And that she is ensuring and really providing a model and an example to other politicians of how to really operate within a certain kind of political integrity and to be focused and strategic about using her political power and aligning with people that allow her to gather those reins of power.
Shirley Chisholm was the first Black woman to serve in the United States Congress. She was elected in 1968 to serve New York's 12th District. Shirley Chisholm retired from Congress in 1983, and she died in 2005 at the age of 80.
Now, Taquina, you read Dr. Fraser's book from cover to cover. I read the introduction. What are some of your takeaways from the book?
First of all, many of the issues and concerns, the policies that Chisholm was advocating for are very much the same ones we're still engaged in trying to make change around in 2025. So I don't know if that means she was ahead of her time, if she was on time and the rest of us are late, but it's very clear that she very much understood what were the major concerns of, around gender, around race, around issues of the environment, anti-war. She was on the forefront of those issues. Another takeaway for me was, just as Dr. Fraser said, Shirley Chisholm was a brilliant political strategist. And she talked about the importance of being a political bloc, building power, but also recognizing that in order to get things done in a larger way, you also had to work in coalition. So her strategy, I think, is still very relevant today. And I'm going back to, and I'm not remembering what he said exactly, but what Viet Nguyen said about sometimes you got to work within the structures in order to change them. And that would summarize Shirley Chisholm's, I'd say, political philosophy. She believed that you worked within the system, that you understood the power structures and you built power and you worked both to be a powerful bloc. And in this case, she was speaking specifically to the issues of Black Americans, but also that you had to work across communities and across identity groups in order to make meaningful change. And another quotation that Shirley Chisholm is known for is, if they don't give you a seat at the table, then bring a folding chair. And I think that folding chair has become symbolic of ways that people use power that go beyond its original use in that Shirley Chisholm quote. And I probably didn't get her quote exactly, but yeah, Shirley was like, don't wait to be invited, show up.
And that folding chair was created by Nathaniel Walker and patented in 1911. And Nathaniel Walker was an African American, right?
Yeah. So another symbol in a sense. We had the piano, now we've got the folding chair. And we have to give props to Dr. Fraser because many of Shirley Chisholm's speeches were never written down.
Right, yeah.
And she was a powerful, both an extemporaneous speaker, but also, she just delivered. And so that was a major accomplishment to gather Shirley Chisholm's speeches along with her writings. You've been enjoying Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters, a podcast where we talk about historical drama series and films as windows to the past and mirrors of the present.
Visit our webpage at michonbostongroup.com/Boston Sisters. Share this podcast. Join our historical drama community by signing up for our newsletter to stay up to date on future episodes and bonus content.
Now, back to our podcast conversation.
Now we come to our fourth summer book, and that is Call the Midwife, which is another nonfiction book. It's a memoir by Jennifer Worth. Call the Midwife is the inspiration for the popular series of the same title, based on Worth's experiences as a nurse midwife in London's East End in the 1950s. Call the Midwife has been a successful historical drama series for 14 seasons in the UK and on PBS here in the US. In episode 70, we were very happy to have one of the actresses who's been with the series since the beginning. Jenny Agutter, who plays Sister Julienne, the head nun at Nanada's house, where the nurses and nun midwives live and are on call. In the podcast, we talked with Jenny Agutter about what makes Call the Midwife a story for our times.
It deals with people. It deals with humanity. It deals with social issues. It deals with some really major problems over the years. And the lovely thing about doing it over this long period of time is seeing the changes that happen economically, socially, in medicine, in everything. for women, all of these things. And I think that's actually what people enjoy. It doesn't have easy answers to things. It doesn't have easy endings. But in it, there is a group of people. There are a group of people in Poplar, and the centre of which is Nonnatus House and the community and the midwives that support one another. And I think that in these times today is really important.
There are 3 memoirs by Jennifer Worth that inspired the Call the Midwife series. We're putting the first memoir on our Page to Screen summer reading list, titled Call the Midwife, A True Story of the East End, which was published in 2002.
The Call the Midwife series is created, written, and produced by Heidi Thomas. The series has moved past the 1950s and 1960s of Jennifer Worth's 3 memoirs, and now, with Series 14, has moved into the 1970s. Creator Heidi Thomas is writing original stories for the series with new characters. A 15th series of Call the Midwife is in the works, as well as the annually anticipated Christmas special, which is currently in production. There's news that a prequel spinoff focused on Sister Julienne working as a midwife during World War II is in the works. For those of you who watched the series, you may recall that Sister Julienne often talks about what it was like to be a midwife during the war and how the Poplar community was impacted by the war.
One interesting thing we learned from our conversation with Jenny Agutter is that her character, Sister Julienne, is based on a real-life person, a nun named Jocelyn, known to her nieces as Aunt Jossie. I think that's the pronunciation. You could read about it in a book called Letters to the Midwife. And apparently the nieces read Jennifer Worth's memoirs and by the description figured it out that that was their Aunt Jossie, who's Sister Julienne in the book, in the memoir, as well as in the series. So I just want to read a little bit of what one of the nieces wrote to Jennifer Worth, which, by the way, Jennifer Worth and Sister Jocelyn, or Jossie, Aunt Jossie, continued their correspondence even after Jennifer Worth left Nonnatus House and after she had children. So they had a long correspondence over the years.
And just FYI, Nonnatus House is actually not the real name of the midwife organization where Jennifer Worth worked.
Right. She probably wanted to protect the identities and the privacies of people, since she was writing about many personal, private things in terms of birthing and the situations of poverty that was in that area. I'm sure she was trying to protect the privacy of individuals and organizations. So the niece writes, I have just finished reading the first 2 books of your Nonnatus House trilogy, and I await the third with great impatience. My cousin Caroline Slack sent me the first book saying that it featured our Aunt Jossie. She didn't tell me which particular sister in the book she was, but there were various pointers that made Sister Julienne the most likely candidate. And when I reached page 133 of the paperback edition, I found the definitive clue which clinched the matter. Sister Julienne's eyes twinkled. That's in quotes.
Sweet.
That was something that, at least our conversation with Jenny Agutter, revealed to me that made me actually go get the book Letters to the Midwife. So I guess we'll have to add that, not as a summer read, but as something in our affiliate bookstore that people can also access if they want to read all the letters that fans or people who read her memoirs have been writing. This was before the series took off. You know, she was getting letters from people who read the memoirs who actually lived in that community as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Just a warning, as you're reading Jennifer Worth's memoir, I would say that there are parts of, or in some of the stories she tells about members of the community, she comes off as really judgmental.
Oh,
And yet, as you go through the memoir, you see her having her own revelations and kind of reflecting on her own reactions and questioning, is she really, is she being judgmental? Is she looking at people without understanding what are the circumstances that have created the challenges that she sees? I mean, she's witnessing a lot of really hard stuff. She's seeing people who are victims of domestic abuse, child abandonment, the poverty, the really, really very uh, unsanitary living conditions. People who don't have
indoor.
inside bathrooms,
Right,
okay,
right.
inside toilets, people who, you have, like, 6 children living in a two-room apartment, living in places where there's no elevator and the moms have to take the prams up the stairs, 4 flights, 5 flights of stairs, and you get this sense of real hardship and of a young woman who has her own notions of how people should live and what a decent life looks like. But then you see her kind of making also a transition and coming to understand that it isn't about people's quote unquote moral failures, but it really is people grappling with very challenging conditions. And so that's my warning for folks because through the lens of our own time, we might see her as being someone who is, kind of you know, throwing shade on poor people, when in reality, you're actually seeing a young woman who is coming through her experiences of the popular community to understand better the situations of poverty and challenges around health, particularly in that she is coming at a time when there is a tension between public health and the kind of uh, we would call it maybe mission work that the nuns, along with the midwives at Nanada's house, are doing.
So you're saying, in the memoir, we see growth, transition of the author.
We see someone who is coming to new understandings, but you also get a little bit of her life apart from
Hmm.
being a midwife. And one of my favorite stories has to do with one of her midwife colleagues. I think is it Chumsley or
Chummy.
Chummy? Yes, uh, being determined to learn to ride a bike. And she's helped by this 12-year-old who becomes like her champion and her protector. And I won't spoil it for you because it's a very moving story, but this boy grows up and he becomes kind of the protector for a very famous person. And Jennifer Worth basically is saying you could see his personality, his way of taking care of Chummy and making sure that other people didn't, um, people made fun of her because she was large,
She was
she was tall, she
tall.
was awkward, etc. And he made sure that uh, he encouraged her to learn to ride the bike, but also made sure that nobody messed with Chummy. So
Yeah,
that's one of my favorite pieces from the memoir. And of course, Call the Midwife for me, I could just, like, watch it with a box of tissue because there's always something in the stories that's so human that for me, it chokes me up a little bit, and there's always something in the stories that makes me just laugh out loud because sometimes the human condition is just ridiculous and funny.
Yeah, well, and one thing people can get out of the series is that you hear some of the memoir in the series. If you look at the first season or so, you hear Vanessa Redgrave is Jennifer Worth, so to speak, her voice narrating this story. She comes at the beginning, she comes at the end. And yes, I remember people would say, "I'm going home." It would be a Sunday. "I'm going home and watch Call the Midwife and cry." It became a Sunday ritual.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
if I were to say, should I read the memoir first or should I see the series first? I'm sure most people are going to start with the series. I think, the memoir and, like, the letters to the midwife are great to give you more backstory and understand the real people, who were part of this community, because especially what's moving in letters to the midwife, and I'm not saying that's one of our books, but I'm just saying it's a supplemental piece, is that these are some of the women who were part of that popular community, who lived there, who read the memoir and started writing to the author. Definitely the series is worth watching, and the memoir is enlightening.
And so now we come to the fifth and final page to screen summer read for 2025. I get the feeling people may have guessed this one, or maybe the theme. But let's start with the fact that 2025 is the 250th anniversary of Jane Austen's birth. Jane Austen was born December 16th, 1775, and this is a year of various commemorations and celebrations and tours and all kinds of programming around Jane Austen and her novels. And for the 2025 page to screen summer read, we've added Miss Austen by Gill Hornby, who was our guest on the podcast for episode 72. Miss Austen was adapted into a 4-part series that premiered on Masterpiece in May 2025. The protagonist in Miss Austen is the Pride and Prejudice author's sister, Cassandra, who's been vilified by Jane Austen's biographers, her fans, and even Jane Austen's family.
Yeah, I'm like, "Geez."
And all because of the unforgivable act of burning many of Jane Austen, that famous author's personal letters after her death. And here's what Gill Hornby had to say about Cassandra Austen's legacy.
All biographers hate Cassandra, this person I was worshipping her, because she burnt the letters. And then I read the memoirs of the nieces and nephews who all gave Cassandra very short shrift because Jane had been very sensible and died at 41 and therefore could be remembered as a kind of brilliant young woman and genius and all the rest of it. And Cassandra lived on and they saw her as a joyless old stick, which really wasn't very fair, actually. And then I read Jane's letters, the 161 that Cassandra has let us have, Jane's letters to Cassandra, and saw that Jane herself worshipped Cassandra. And I thought, well, there we are. Everybody else got an axe to grind, but this one person who really, did not suffer fools at all, didn't suffer many people, actually, Jane Austen.
Gill Hornby did what needed to be done for Cassandra. She vindicated Jane's older sister's actions as an act of sisterly love and loyalty. Miss Austen, published in 2020, is one of 3 novels inspired by the Austen family. Gill Hornby's second novel is Godmersham Park, published in 2022, and The Elopement is due out this fall.
And I would add, The Elopement is due out this fall in the United States. It's already been released in the United States.
We're bringing up the rear here.
Yeah. So, I think I said Cassandra, Jill said Cassandra. It's like tomato, tomato, potato, potato.
Jane's older sister outlived Jane. She lived to be 70 years old, right? About that age.
It was, about that age. Yeah.
And then Miss Austen, she's probably in her 50s.
Yeah, it looks like she's probably in her 50s.
And still unmarried. And still not having a fortune of her own. So one thing I got out of the story about Cassandra Austen, I'm gonna be saying Cassandra, so is that how precarious her situation was as an unmarried woman of her age, or any woman over the age of what, 20? In that time in the Regency era?
Yeah, because your prospects for even getting married were much reduced the older you got, the older you were with each passing year.
Right, and,
Especially if you didn't have money. Now, richer women could probably attract husbands.
and she wasn't in service, like Mrs. Hughes in Downton Abbey. And she couldn't because the Austen family, that's not what they did. And they had a brother who did have property, and so she was dependent on the kindness of this brother who had how many cottages did Jill Hornby said? 36?
I thought it was I know it was more than 10.
Yeah, there were a lot of. And, for some reason did not invite his parents and his sisters to live in one of them when they gave up the parish home and then moved to Bath. But that's another story. But yeah, the money part was still there with a different twist when there are no marriage prospects for Cassandra. She gave that option up. But also, a woman of her age in the Regency era and the health issues that could come up at that time of life. Even a cold could take you out. And heaven forbid you get some kind of viral infection or something. And that something like that happens in the book. And I was like, oh my God, what's going to happen? And you could feel the sense of fear in that. But there are it's another story too. But for some reason, while reading the book, I was so honed in on Cassandra and where she was at this time in her life.
Well, I think that the book, Miss Austen, yeah, it's about Cassandra looking for the letters and making sure that she protects her sister's reputation because there's an indication that, and I think a lot of creative people have this when they can't create or their creative endeavors aren't recognized. It sounds like Jane Austen had maybe a little bit of depression
Yeah.
around this, but it's not how she wanted the world to see her. And yet, what's really holding a thread throughout the book is what's going to happen to this young woman whose father has died and she can't inherit?
Isabella.
What's going to happen? Which sister will take her in? And even her choices among the sisters aren't all that inviting. And then you look at the situation of whether or not you are, as Jill Hornby pointed out, educated women could become governesses. And that's, if you want to continue on with Jill Hornby's books, which I recommend, that's in Godmersham Park. But if you look at the situation of women who weren't educated, there wasn't anything they could do if they didn't get married beyond maybe, they couldn't go into service, but they also often ended up in prostitution.
Yes.
And so the dilemma of women in the Regency times, for me, one of the takeaways is that is something I look at now more strongly in Jane Austen's novels. Because even though generally the adaptations, the films, the series, etc., emphasize the romance and the romantic comedy and finding the right mate, what was underneath all of it was, how are these women going to survive financially? And that's in Sense and Sensibility. You see it definitely in Pride and Prejudice. There's always some character in a Jane Austen novel where her situation could be really dire if she does not get married and find a way to be supported financially.
As we explored this with Jill Hornby, what I enjoyed about that conversation is that we took that seriously. This is not comedy. This was real. This was a real concern, and your life depended on this if you were a woman of that time. We sometimes, what I'm liking about the conversations of Jane Austen's novels now is that it's getting beyond the romance part, or finding the one.
And we're seeing some of that today in conversations about like being a trad wife, or women having still their own, being responsible for their own financial security, or for today's generations, what does financial well-being look like, period? Because these are also pretty challenging times financially for, I would say, no matter what your gender is. And so I think even if you're not into the romance, mate-finding aspect of some of the novels, if you read Jill Hornby's Miss Austen, you can really see how dealing with the challenges of how are you going to support yourself and how are you going to live when you don't have money is something I think everybody can relate to.
I hope we can explore that more this year with the 250th anniversary of Jane Austen's birth. What would you say? Read the book first of Miss Austen, see the series first?
Well, I can only say I saw the series after reading the book.
Same here.
Yeah, so I would have a bias either way, but I will say the series adaptation is really very well done and made the characters very three-dimensional, come to life, and really pulled me into their situations emotionally, which is often something I find happens more readily with a novel because, again, you can kind of take your time and there's more detail that an author can give you and more nuance, etc. Yeah, just if you see the series first, go read the book.
Yes, I read the book first as well, saw the series. I think Jill is very happy. Jill Hornby is very happy with the results. That doesn't always happen with authors' works, but this is another case, just like The Sympathizer, where she wasn't as involved in the process, but seems to be happy with the results. So I would say either order works just fine. Now, our recap of our page-to-screen books for 2025. We have The Sympathizer by Viet Nguyen,
The Piano Lesson, a play by August Wilson,
Shirley Chisholm in Her Own Words, Speeches and Writings, edited by Zinga A. Fraser,
called The Midwife, A True Story of the East End by Jennifer Worth, a memoir,
and Miss Austen by Jill Hornby.
All 5 books are available in our affiliate bookstore. Go to our webpage at michonbostongroup.com/Boston Sisters and click on the affiliate bookstore link. When you buy a book, you support production costs for historical drama with the Boston Sisters and independent booksellers. You can also look for these titles in your local public library.
Add our summer read historical drama films and series to your watch list. The Sympathizer is streaming on HBO Max. The Piano Lesson is streaming on Netflix. Shirley is also streaming on Netflix. Call the Midwife is streaming on pbs.org, Netflix, and other streaming platforms. And Miss Austen is streaming on the PBS Passport and the PBS Masterpiece Prime Video channel. Do a search to find out where you can rent or purchase these films and series in addition to subscription information. And again, as we always say, check your local library as well.
Michon and I hope that you've enjoyed this page-to-screen episode of Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters. Let us know if you read one or more books we recommended, if you've watched a film or series, and or if you've listened to any of the related podcasts. You can write us at podcast@michonbostongroup.com or drop a line in the comments for this episode. Subscribe to Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters wherever you enjoy your favorite podcast. Sign up for the newsletter to stay up to date on new podcasts, bonus episodes, and historical drama-related resources and activities. You can find the link on michonbostongroup.com/Boston Sisters webpage as well. Follow us on Instagram at Historical Drama Sisters and on Facebook at Historical Drama Boston Sisters. Like and share Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters on your social media.
This is Michon Boston.
And this is Tequina Boston.
Thank you for listening and reading. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters, a podcast about historical films and series dramas. Visit our webpage at michonbostongroup.com/Boston Sisters.
Tell us what historical dramas you're watching. Who knows? We may do a show about it. Sign up for our newsletter, subscribe to the podcast, and share it with the people you know who binge on historical drama.
Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters is brought to you by the Michon Boston Group. The views and opinions expressed on Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters are those of the speakers and do not represent the positions or views of the Michon Boston Group, its clients, or affiliates. This is Michon Boston.
And this is Tequina Boston. Thank you for listening.